Because understanding great literature is better than trying to read and understand yet another business book. On the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, we commit to reading, dissecting, and analyzing the great books of the Western canon. You know, those books, from Jane Austen to Shakespeare, and everything else in between, that you might have fallen asleep trying to read in high school. We do this for our listeners, the owner, the entrepreneur, the manager, or the civic leader who doesn't have the time to read, dissect, analyze, and leverage insights from literature to execute leadership best practices in the confusing and chaotic postmodern world we all now inhabit. Welcome to the rescuing of Western civilization at the intersection of literature and leadership. Welcome to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast.
Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, episode number 128. The journalist Walter Duranty once quipped that, quote, "In order to make an omelet, you have to break a few eggs," unquote. Duranty was, of course, talking about the efforts of the Russian strongman known as Stalin to remake the Soviets in his own image. But Duranty didn't realize, of course, at the time that the ultimate egg breaker of the 20th century would ascend from the feudal and colonial peasantry, one of the largest countries on the planet. We cannot think about the nature of warfare in the 20th century without considering the nature of revolutionary struggle and, of course, guerrilla warfare. After all, revolution and resistance go together. One follows the other. And political power comes out of the end of a gun. The long and tragic story of the post-World War I 20th century is partially one of vast static armies seeking to crush a peoples-led rebellion to advance political aims. And in reaction and response, the other side of that story features small bands of jihadists, terrorists, revolutionaries, and guerrillas formed almost organically, it would seem, to oppose those large armies' goals. I have said in previous episodes that, quote-unquote, the enemy gets a vote, and the enemy does. But the inevitable and unstated pushback to this idea is that somehow the level or the degree of resistance to the use of mass inflections of political and military power must somehow match the level, size, and force of the power wielded unjustly in order to be considered legitimate. This is a fatally faulty understanding that leaves the door open to the granular seed of resistance being planted, watered, and grown. It turned out, against all odds, that in the 20th century, small resistance, small pushbacks, and small power mattered quite a bit. And the person, the individual, the titular leader who understood this fact innately and leveraged this fact to secure himself long-term political power over the lives of almost 900 million souls in one of the most populous countries on the planet is the person who wrote the book we are covering today on the podcast. Today, we will be pulling, we will be extracting, we will be, dare I say, in a guerrilla fashion, running after the leadership lessons for leaders in the 21st century from one of the greatest political leaders of the 20th century on guerrilla warfare by Mao Zedong. Leaders, to engage successfully in guerrilla operations, you must articulate as a happy warrior a coherent, and some would say revolutionary, vision of the future. And we pick up from Mao Zedong on guerrilla warfare. The version that I have is translated and with an introduction by Brigadier General Samuel B. Griffith, United States Marine Corps retired. Looks as though he wrote two introductions to this book. We will not be covering the introduction. Instead, we're going to jump right into what is guerrilla warfare. And I quote, "In a war of revolutionary character, guerrilla operations are a necessary part. This is particularly true in a war waged for the emancipation of a people who inhabit a vast nation. China is such a nation whose techniques are undeveloped and whose communications are poor. She finds herself confronted with a strong and victorious Japanese imperialism. Under these circumstances, the development of the type of guerrilla warfare characterized by the quality of mass is both necessary and natural. This warfare must be developed to an unprecedented degree, and it must coordinate with the operations of our regular armies. If we fail to do this, we will find it difficult to defeat the enemy. These guerrilla operations must not be considered as an independent form of warfare. They are but one step in the total war, one aspect of the revolutionary struggle. They are the inevitable result of the clash between oppressor and oppressed when the latter reaches the limits of their endurance. In our case, these hostilities began at a time when the people were unable to endure any more from the Japanese imperialists. Lenin, in The People and Revolution, said, quote, "A people's insurrection and a people's revolution are not only natural but inevitable." Close quote. We consider guerrilla operations as but one aspect of our total or mass war because they, lacking the quality of independence, are of themselves incapable of providing a solution to the struggle. Guerrilla warfare has qualities and objectives peculiar to itself. It is a weapon that a nation inferior in arms and military equipment may employ against a more powerful aggressor nation. When the invader pierces deep into the heart of the weaker country and occupies her territory in cruel and oppressive manner, there is no doubt that conditions of terrain, climate, and society in general offer obstacles to his progress and may be used to advantage by those who oppose him. In guerrilla warfare, we turn these advantages to the purpose of resisting and defeating the enemy. During the progress of hostilities, guerrillas gradually develop into orthodox forces that operate in conjunction with other units of the regular army. Thus, the regularly organized troops, those guerrillas who have attained that status, and those who have not reached that level of development combine to form the military power of a national revolutionary war. There can be no doubt that the ultimate result of this will be victory. When we think about revolutionary characters, when we think about people who lead revolutions, we should be thinking about Mao Zedong rather than Lenin or even Stalin. Mao Zedong, born December 26, 1893, died September 9th, 1976, also known as Chairman Mao, was a Chinese politician, revolutionary, and political theorist who founded the People's Republic of China, the PRC, and led the country from its establishment in 1949 until his death in 1976. Mao was the son of a peasant raised in Shaoshan, Hunan, and apparently his father was rather brutal with him, demanding that he get an appropriate education, which he, of course, did. Now, being born in 1893, there was a lot of things happening in East Asia, Boxer rebellions, and of course, the aftermath of World War I. And he went to Peking University, and while working as a librarian at Peking University, he adopted Marxist-Leninism, and in 1921 became a founding member of the Chinese Communist Party. He helped establish the Chinese Red Army as first in opposition to the nationalists, the Kuomintang, but then later on in opposition to the Japanese imperialists. This is the perspective that he wrote on guerrilla warfare from. But then after the war was over, in the 1940s, he turned his revolutionary army onto the Kuomintang and drove them out to the island of Taiwan. By the way, that's going to come back later to haunt us. He helped establish the Chinese Red Army as a result, as I already said, and he developed a coherent and principled, we'll talk more about principles today as well, but a coherent and principled strategy of guerrilla warfare. He laid it all out. Now, with that being said, Chairman Mao, it must be acknowledged, did lead China through the tumultuous middle part of the 20th century, everything from great famines and great purges, all the way to the Little Red Book and quite a few struggle sessions. His policies were responsible for a vast number of deaths. Close to 100 million people died at his hands, or because of the ways in which policies that he advocated for were carried out by his henchmen. These people were victims of starvation, persecution, prison labor, mass executions, and of course, famine. The Great Leap Forward couldn't have happened without there being enough bread to go around. Chairman Mao's regime was totalitarian, and just like Stalin before him and Lenin before him, Mao Zedong was a totalizing force. He was principled, but he was totalizing. Everything bowed to him. And even these days in China, if you go and you read the Wikipedia article, which I pulled the majority of the information that I have from here today from, if you go and read the Wikipedia article on him, you will discover that modern Chinese folks, the modern Chinese Communist Party, the modern CCP, struggles with Mao Zedong's legacy. Yeah, he, just like Stalin with Russia, he jerked the Chinese out of peasantry and feudalism and into the 20th century. But he had to kill a lot of people in order to do it. And he had to be a man of iron principle during a time when the United States and the Russians, almost came to blows during that thing that we all forget that occurred in the middle of the 20th century called the Cold War. There's a lesson here for leaders about principles. There's a lesson here for leaders about strategy. There's a lesson here for leaders about innovation. But if you get all caught up in the totalitarian nature of it, you will miss the lesson. And don't get me wrong, I'm not in favor of tyranny, but I am in favor of learning from everything and everybody. Back to the book, back to On Guerrilla Warfare. We're going to pick it up with a discussion, or Mao Zedong's positions on guerrilla warfare in history. And I quote, "Guerrilla warfare is neither a product of China nor peculiar to the present day. From the earliest historical days, it has been a feature of wars fought by every class of men against invaders and oppressors. Under suitable conditions, it has great possibilities. The many guerrilla wars in history have their points of difference, their peculiar characteristics, their varying processes and conclusions, and we must respect and profit by the experience of those whose blood was shed in them. What a pity it is that the priceless experience gained during the several hundred wars waged by the peasants of China cannot be marshaled today to guide us. Our only experience in guerrilla hostilities has been that gained from the several conflicts that have been carried on against us by foreign imperialisms. But that experience should help the fighting Chinese recognize the necessity for guerrilla warfare and should confirm them in confidence of ultimate victory. In September 1812, the Frenchman Napoleon, in the course of swallowing all of Europe, invaded Russia at the head of a great army totaling several 100,000 infantry, cavalry, and artillery. At that time, Russia was weak and her ill-prepared army was not concentrated. The most important phase of her strategy was the use made of Cossack cavalry and detachments of peasants to carry on guerrilla operations. After giving up Moscow, the Russians formed 9 guerrilla divisions of about 500 men each. These and the vast groups of organized peasants carried on partisan warfare and continually harassed the French army. When the French army was withdrawing, cold and starving, Russian guerrillas blocked the way and, in combination with regular troops, carried out counterattacks on the French rear, pursuing and defeating them. The army of the heroic Napoleon was almost entirely annihilated, and the guerrillas captured many officers, men, cannon, and rifles. Though the victory was the result of various factors and depended largely on the activities of the regular army, the function of the partisan groups was extremely important. Quote, "The corrupt and poorly organized country that was Russia defeated and destroyed an army led by the most famous soldier of Europe and won the war, in spite of the fact that her ability to organize guerrilla regimes was not fully developed. At times, guerrilla groups were hindered in their operations, and the supply of equipment and arms was insufficient. If we use the Russian saying, it was a case of a battle between, quote, the fist and the axe," close quote. Ivanov. From 1918 to 1920, the Russian Soviets, because of the opposition and intervention of foreign imperialisms and the internal disturbances of White Russian groups, were forced to organize themselves in occupied territories and fight a real war. In Siberia and Alishan, in the rear of the army of the traitor Denikin, and in the rear of the Poles, there were many Red Russian guerrillas. These not only disrupted and destroyed the communications in the enemy's rear, but also frequently prevented his advance. On one occasion, the guerrillas completely destroyed a retreating white army that had previously been defeated by regular red forces. Kolchak, Denikin, the Japanese, and the Poles, owing to the necessity of staving off the attacks of guerrillas, were forced to withdraw regular troops from the front. Quote, "Thus not only was the enemy's power impoverished, but he found himself unable to cope with the ever-moving guerrilla," close quote, the nature of guerrilla action. The development of guerrillas at that time had only reached the stage where there were detached groups of several thousands in strength, old, middle-aged, and young. The old men organized themselves into propaganda groups known as silver-haired units. There was a suitable guerrilla activity for the middle-aged. The young men formed combat units, and there were even groups for the children. Among the leaders were determined communists who carried on general political work among the people. These, although they opposed the doctrine of extreme guerrilla warfare, were quick to oppose those who condemned it. Experience tells us that, quote, "Orthodox armies are the fundamental and principal power. Guerrilla units are secondary to them and assist in the accomplishment of the mission assigned to the regular forces," close quote. Lessons of the Civil War in Russia. Many of the guerrilla regimes in Russia gradually developed until in battle they were able to discharge functions of organized regulars. The army of the famous General Galen was entirely derived from guerrillas. During the 7 months in 1935 and 36, the Abyssinians lost their war against Italy. The cause of defeat, aside from the most important political reasons that there were dissentant political groups, no strong government party, and unstable policy, was a failure to adopt a positive policy of mobile warfare.
Hello. So I'm going to do some shilling here, and hopefully this will be a pause in our riveting conversation for you. I have an offer for you. My most recent book is 12 Rules for Leaders, The Foundation of Intentional Leadership. It's available in paperback, hardcover, or as an ebook on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Kobo, and any other place you order books. Now, in this book, I address the 12 leadership areas that I have found leaders need to be the most intentional in to be the type of leader followers actually want to follow. From establishing a foundation of leading teams through managing conflict effectively, all the way through leading teams through change, knowing what to do and why to do it can help readers, like the ones listening to this show, become better leaders. Look, reading this book and living it is like getting coaching from me directly without having to pay my full coaching rate. Head on over to leadershiptoolbox.us, that's leadershiptoolbox.us, and scroll down the homepage and click on the Buy Now button to purchase in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle format on Amazon 12 Rules for Leaders, the foundation for intentional leadership. And that's it for me. Now back to the show.
Mao, in describing guerrilla warfare in history, of course, talks about the French army's retreat from the Russian steppes during the Napoleonic Wars, and of course ends his analysis with this quote: "If we use the Russian saying, it was the case of a battle between the fist and the axe." Guerrilla strategy, whether it is guerrilla strategy applied to entrepreneurship and startups or guerrilla strategy applied to established organizations, any type of strategy that is based in overcoming an incumbent and in overthrowing their long-held shibboleths and rules and ways of quote-unquote doing things, any strategy that is put forth in a guerrilla manner or executed in the form of guerrilla tactics, any strategy relies on alertness, mobility, and attack. The guerrilla must be alert to the conditions on the ground, both geographic, but also economic, social, political, and, of course, spiritual. The guerrilla must be able to move. The guerrilla must not be tied down to a particular place or even to a particular set of ideas. And the guerrilla is always attacking. Mao noted this. He said the guerrilla is always attacking from the rear. Guerrilla strategy relies on adaptability, innovation, and it also relies on a hyper level of skin in the game that tends to defy and flummox mature systems. Guerrilla warfare, all guerrilla warfare, is typically based on the attaining of political power, not necessarily theological power or social power or cultural power, but political power. Because most of the purveyors of guerrilla warfare, most of the individuals who engage in guerrilla warfare are attempting to create political change via other means. In many ways, the tip towards the tyrannical use of power to control other people and ensure compliance is always just there on the other side of the revolutionary elan and the really drab and dour uniforms. It is that compliance that you need in order to get people to fight and to die for you. From the silver-haired brigade all the way to the children, everyone is armed. Everyone participates. Guerrilla warfare and the overall guerrilla strategy has to involve mass, which is what Mao started with on guerrilla warfare. Mass, though, does not necessarily mean large. Mass does not necessarily mean huge. And that's where we get confused, because we think mass, we think a lot of people. But guess what? If I wanted to overthrow the country, or if I just wanted to overthrow your business, I wouldn't need a whole bunch of people. Matter of fact, if I really wanted to start some problems at Google or Facebook or John Deere or Toyota or Ford or even SpaceX, all I would need is a really dedicated group of like-minded individuals with low numbers. Leaders need to understand that you don't need all of these, to paraphrase the comedian Joey Diaz, motherfuckers out here in order to get shit done. Leaders need to understand that all you need is the impact of a historical vision of where you'd like to go. You need revolutionary elan for sure, and you need to keep that level of emotional engagement at a high level, but you really don't need all these people. You just need the dedicated few, the proud, to paraphrase from another segment of our American military. You need the Marines. But you need to apply that thinking to guerrilla strategy and guerrilla tactics in guerrilla warfare. When you lead this way, when you lead through understanding the impact of history on your vision, you will not have a disembodied vision. You will have a vision that actually works. You will have people who will be excited to kill the enemy, who will be excited to lean forward into business. They will be excited to stay long nights and do hard things. And when you lead this way, you will be leading with your fists. And leading with your fists, well, you don't actually have to win the battle with the axe. You just have to knock it out of the other guy's hand. Back to the book, back to On Guerrilla Warfare by Mao Zedong. We're going to pick up in a long chapter, chapter 1, What is Guerrilla Warfare? We're going to pick up with some ideas here that I think you need to have. And I quote, "In guerrilla warfare, select the tactic of seeming to come from the east and attacking from the west. Avoid the solid, attack the hollow. Attack, withdraw, deliver a lightning blow, seek a lightning decision. When guerrillas engage a stronger enemy, they withdraw when he advances, harass him when he stops, strike him when he is weary, pursue him when he withdraws. In guerrilla strategy, the enemy's rear, flanks, and other vulnerable spots are his vital points. And there he must be harassed, attacked, dispersed, exhausted, and annihilated. Only in this way can guerrillas carry out their mission of independent guerrilla action and coordination with the effort of the regular armies. But, in spite of the most complete preparation, there can be no victory if mistakes are made in the matter of command. Guerrilla warfare, based on the principles we have mentioned and carried on over a vast extent of territory in which communications are inconvenient, will contribute tremendously towards ultimate defeat of the Japanese and consequent emancipation of the Chinese people. A careful distinction must be made between two types of guerrilla warfare. The fact that revolutionary guerrilla warfare is based on the masses of the people does not in itself mean that the organization of guerrilla units is impossible in a war of counter-revolutionary character. The second type of guerrilla warfare directly contradicts the law of historical development. If we fail to differentiate between the two types of guerrilla hostilities mentioned, it is likely that we will exaggerate their effect when applied by an invader. We might arrive at the conclusion that, quote, the invader can organize guerrilla units from among the people, close quote. Such a conclusion might well diminish our confidence in guerrilla warfare. As far as this matter is concerned, we have but to remember the historical experiences of revolutionary struggles. Further, we must distinguish general revolutionary wars from those of a purely quote-unquote class type. In the former case, the whole people of a nation, without regard to class or party, carry on a guerrilla struggle that is an instrument of the national policy. Its basis is, therefore, much broader than is the basis of a struggle of class type. Of a general guerrilla war, it has been said, quote, when a nation is invaded and the people become sympathetic to one another and all aid in organizing guerrilla units, in civil war, no matter to what extent guerrillas are developed, they do not produce the same results as when they are formed to resist an invasion by foreigners. Civil war in Russia, close quote. The one strong feature of guerrilla warfare in a civil struggle is its equality of internal purity. One class may be easily united and perhaps fight with great effect, whereas in a national revolutionary war, guerrilla units are faced with the problem of internal unification of different class groups. This necessitates the use of propaganda. Both types of guerrilla war are, however, similar in that they both employ the same military methods. Now let me move a little bit further forward in this chapter. If in today's struggle we fail to apply the historical truths of revolutionary guerrilla war, we will fall into the error of believing, with Tao Hu saying, that under the impact of Japanese mechanized army, quote, the guerrilla unit has lost its historical function, close quote. Jen Shishan writes, in olden days, guerrilla warfare was just part of regular strategy, but there is almost no chance that it can be applied today. These opinions are harmful. If we do not make an estimate of the characteristics peculiar to our anti-Japanese guerrilla war, but insist on applying it to mechanical formulas derived from past history, we are making the mistake of placing our hostilities in the same category as all other national guerrilla struggles. If we hold this view, we will simply be beating our heads against a stone wall, and we will be unable to profit from guerrilla hostilities. You got to innovate in business, like you're a guerrilla or a pirate, or in leadership in general. Look, guerrillas and pirates have many things in common, as we can see from that last clip we just read. They have the ability to rely on the failure of established incumbents to move quickly, break things, and take risks. Guerrillas and pirates don't care about history or the historical dialectic either. They don't care about what came before. They only care about taking risks. As we know, innovation is the most overused word in business and leadership. And innovation really only matters if you're a guerrilla willing to break the bounds of approaches, forms, and even break the bounds of rebellion itself. This is why incumbents, from politics to business, from finance to family, don't like it when things change. Don't like it when a guerrilla comes in and becomes the vanguard of a revolution. I love this quote from Vladimir Lenin. Evil does not exist in guerrilla warfare, but only in the unorganized and undisciplined activities that are anarchism. He would probably say anarchism. Point is, and Lenin was correct, it is that lack of organization, it is that lack of discipline that kills guerrilla leadership. It kills guerrillas' forward momentum. See, incumbents think that a guerrilla, that a person coming in who is doing the things that a guerrilla does, that is overthrowing the established system, they think that that person is undisciplined, unorganized, or even unfocused. That is the failure of the incumbents. That's the failure of incumbents to even think about what is happening. They don't understand, they don't appreciate, and invariably, they are overthrown. The biggest challenge that guerrillas represent is a challenge of delivering chaos. It's the challenge of taking risks to overthrow an incumbent, and it's the challenge of doing it in a way where the incumbent is completely and totally taken by surprise. We saw this most recently in the most recent presidential elections in the United States, but we also have seen it in a lot of other places. We've seen it in entrepreneurship, and we've seen it in the course of the last 25 years in the startup community. Pirates are organized and disciplined. They take risks. They overthrow incumbents. Guerrillas are organized and disciplined. But guerrillas and pirates differ in one very key way. Guerrillas make sure to use propaganda. They use messaging to ensure that everyone stays in line. Remember that whole ensuring compliance thing? They use the messaging because they understand that both the medium and the message are important to keep everybody engaged in the revolution. Leaders, innovate like guerrillas and scare the incumbents like pirates. So, what are we to do with this information from the few clips that we've read from On Guerrilla Warfare by Mao Zedong? I would encourage you to pick up the book. One of the better chapters in it, if you're going to pick it up, and one of the more highlighted or annotated chapters that I read in the book was chapter 5, Organization for Guerrilla Warfare. Could be particularly useful for you if you're looking to mount an insurrection or overthrow an incumbent. What can we learn from what guerrilla warfare did and what it accomplished in the 20th century by writing history in iron and blood? Well, first, a caveat. I don't want it to be said that I am supportive of Marxist-Leninism or supportive of communist revolutions. I'm not a communist. I'm actually an anti-communist, if you know what that means. I'm also not in support of overweening capitalism. I believe we need to have a moral core inside of our capitalism and our capitalistic approaches to the environment, to human capital, to dealing with other people, and to the placement of our resources in the world. I do believe that one of the fundamental problems that has been exposed in the last 25 years of not only a Western culture, but also global culture, has been the failure of capitalism to have a moral core. And a moral core based not on secularism or secular morality, but a moral core based in Christianity. With that being said, I want to be very clear. The Marxist approach to revolution, the Marxist approach to guerrilla tactics, the Marxist approach to piracy, the Marxist approach to innovation is inherently anti-Christian and fundamentally Luciferian because it focuses on the dissolution and deconstruction of history, always chasing a never-ending vista of utopia while, quote-unquote, breaking a few eggs along the way. I think in the 21st century, the opposition to Marxism and Leninism is coming, well, interestingly enough, from the places where Marxism and Leninism used to come, from small places that are local. Small and local is the new big as we have moved past the traumas of the 20th century. And leaders should pay attention to this. Leaders should know that leadership is required to reduce the impact, to reduce the overweening power of mass on local issues and on local incumbencies and even on local guerrilla factions. Leadership is required to reduce the impact of the national on the local and to reverse the power of scaling problems to their highest level, which is what social media brings us, rather than dealing with the problem closest to its source of origin. There's no dopaminergic reward for solving a local problem. I think Chairman Mao would agree with this next statement. Skin in the game is vital to any kind of guerrilla strategy, but it's also vital to any type of business innovation. Discipline is critical to the evolution of action. If you're not disciplined, you're just doing things. Kind of the way the Joker talked about it in The Dark Knight. I'm just a dog chasing a car. I wouldn't know what to do with it if I caught it. And when faced with malevolence, a guerrilla must maintain skepticism in the face of authoritarian, tyrannical manipulation. One of the ways that guerrilla tactics work is they ensure compliance. They brainwash people with propaganda. And that's not to say that we aren't brainwashed in our own social media ways, in the appropriate social media ways in our own era and in our own time. But it is to say that we do live in a free society where alternative viewpoints can act in a guerrilla fashion, not only on your followers, but also on you. And that's something to keep in mind if you're going to go out and be a pirate or behave like a guerrilla. And well, that's it for me.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.